Final reflection on the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II was very important. And as Dickens would say, a beautiful city with brilliant people.
Tray carrying a Diet Coke. It was a Diet Coke one.
We are counting down to a moment of history, a moment that you will remember. I think whatever you may feel about monarchy and having a state that has a royal family as opposed to somebody elected to be head of state, whatever you feel about those things, you will maybe leave those things aside tonight, because in the next 24 hours we're going to witness history in this country. History of a kind that I think only we as the United Kingdom can put on. You will see precision, and you will see an event unfold before you as we finally say farewell to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II after an extended period of national mourning. It's been a packed week. We're going to look back at the things that have happened this week too, over the next 2 hours. And just to say to my regular Unexplained listeners, obviously we're not doing a regular Unexplained show, but please bear with me. Next week, 25th of September, which will be the anniversary of many decades since I first arrived in London, which is kind of strange in itself. So we return to the Unexplained. And if you're one of my Unexplained listeners and viewers with me tonight, thank you very much. New people like Rhiannon, who's watching and listening, I think, tonight in Canada. Rhiannon, thank you for the email that you sent me before, and all of the emails, messages, communications that I had over the last week about last week's show, where, of course, I had the experience that is unusual for me, and that is going back to my news roots, talking about matters of the moment, things that are happening currently, and also wearing a suit and a tie, as indeed I am tonight. So thank you for, the nice things that you said. And only two people were a little negative, and both of them accused me of being, now I've got to get the phrase right here, an establishment shill, because I was doing the show. And I don't think, in fact, anybody who knows me, if you ran those words past them, they would laugh continuously. That's not the point of what we're doing, I don't think. So 2 hours tonight, well, we're going to talk to a lot of people. Rupert Bell, our royal correspondent, will be with us shortly. We're going to talk about the security implications of the next 24 hours, and also the policing implications with a man who was a detective at Scotland Yard, very well known to viewers of Talk TV and many other media outlets, Peter Blacksley. Simon Calder, my old friend, the travel guru, will be here to talk about the unusual travel arrangements that are being made. You know that tonight some of the main London train stations, the termini, are going to be used for accommodating people to some degree. Not all of them, and we will tell you more about that when Simon comes on. He knows more about that. But I did read today about one of the train companies that was actually providing a train for people to rest in. We'll find out about that too. Plus, there's the whole logistical task of having to ferry people in to London and get them out again if they've been part of the queue, which outside this building just over there, we could see outside, that queue continues to move solemnly, step by step, little by little. Those people will be wanting to go home. I think the rate of people actually filing through Westminster Hall was estimated an hour or two ago at 1,700 per hour. That's not a bad rate. And that's one of those things that I talked to at the top of this, isn't it? That we are experts at carrying these things off, of making these things happen. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into the last week. So tonight we look back at the week that's gone. We look forward to the royal funeral and the week ahead when the UK, like I said, hits the ground running. And politically, you're going to see some changes, and you might hear some fireworks too. Earlier today, people were asked to contemplate not joining the queue to see the lying-in state. At one time, I think that queue was something like 24 hours long. A lot of people recounting tales of waits of like 12 hours or so. It's been an extraordinary week in all of our lives. And those people who've queued up have had the reasons that they have told you on this station continuously over these last few days. It's that feeling that you want to do something. And you want to be there. You want to be part of history. Let's get straight to our royal correspondent, Rupert Bell, who's had a very busy week. Rupert, how are you?
Very good, actually, Howard. Thank you. Good to see you in your suit again, Howard.
Well, yes. Just remember it, because it may be some time. I mean, who knows? But it may be some time before I'm seen in this attire again. But you never know. Rupert, can you do us a favour? I think as we're into this last 2 hours of the week, I think it would do us some good to quickly spin through and review the events of this week. This week has been a very compacted week. We've had King Charles touring different parts of the United Kingdom, taking a little tiny bit of time for himself, but not a whole lot, meeting some heads of state. And of course the week started with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's casket being moved from Balmoral down to Holyrood. So talk me through the week, would you?
Well, I think it's been frenetic. You actually realise why there is a 10-day period between her death and the funeral, because so much has to happen just in a constitutional sense. And that means him going around to all the 4 nations of the United Kingdom and all that entails, plus all the rigmarole, just the preparations, the symbolic things that happen. And it feels like at times during the week I was thinking, oh, what's happening next? It was just unbelievable. So from this time last week, I think we were talking about the movement into Edinburgh. But then we've had all the other things, the spectacular things in the Royal Mile, which feel like a lifetime ago. But then we've had all the stuff happening in London, which not only the Q has been the sort of public manifestation of that, but all the state symbolism, the movement of the body from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. And now, of course, all the preparations within that for the funeral and all these heads of states coming here. There's just been a sort of unrelenting and passage of stories that you actually go, what's happening next? Because you at times have to just press the pause button. And you think we're just the sort of interlopers, we're the watchers. But actually for those people at the heart of it, it must be not only when you think about it at the human interest, Howard, which is the family grieving for mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, whatever it is that the family relationship was within the Queen. It is actually then all the other stuff that has gone on that you actually think, wow. And actually, you actually have to sometimes press that pause button and just go, this has been, from 2 weeks ago. If this time last 2 weeks ago, we were actually then about to announce a new prime minister. But in many ways, that feels like, in terms of what's been going on, a lifetime ago, because so much has happened and we've been having to comprehend and take in so much in that 2-week period.
Nobody could have predicted the pace and scale of events this last couple of weeks. I mean, who would have thought? And I think it's worth just going back to the very beginning, that Thursday. People will be asking themselves, where were you? Where were you? What were you doing on that Thursday? And I can remember vividly that I'd had a hospital appointment in the morning, and then I'd gone in to get a bit of breakfast, which is not something I normally do, into the local town. Then I'd wandered off home, turned on the TV, and then suddenly I saw the concern of physicians about the Queen. And then I thought, being a news person like you will have thought, something is afoot. There is more to this than meets the eye. Better stay tuned. And, since then, we haven't stopped. And we had the spectacle of the Queen seeing out Boris Johnson, seeing in Liz Truss, and then leaving us. It was just, you could not have predicted anything like this. Now, there are a number of themes that are being talked about in the news, Rupert, and you'll know a lot about these things, but the lying in state has been executed quite beautifully. I watched it for an hour or two in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep last night. I just turned on the continuous feed, and there was a serenity and peace about that. What I didn't expect, because I don't know much about these things, was, of course, our new king and Prince Harry and William were part of that. The new Prince of Wales were part of that. There was a story in the newspapers today, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this, that according to the Sunday Times this morning, Harry was allowed to wear uniform, but that uniform was missing the initials ER.
Well,
what did that mean?
Well, the ER, I mean, if you're in the army, you have, because you're serving, the Queen, because she is your commander-in-chief, whichever branch of the services you're in. This is where I think that the sort of balancing act, because A, it was the question of whether he was going to wear a uniform, because he's no longer a working royal. So therefore, the Harry story is the soap opera within the big play that is being conducted at the moment, the subplot, the sort of endless sort of, people wanting to know what is going on with Harry, what is going on with Prince Andrew, and when's he going to be allowed to wear uniform? And this is, in terms of military, if you're in the military, you are serving the Queen. That's why you have ER. When I got commissioned, you get a document signed by Elizabeth R saying you are welcome to her forces. It's as simple as that. Now, this is where you have to go is why did they feel it necessary to do? He was allowed to wear uniform. He was a distinguished member of the services. But because he is no longer a working royal, he is like any other person who has left the military. Now, you have seen, and you would have seen when you were watching that continuous feed, suddenly a ex-service man or woman walking through, probably saluting, medals on their chest, happily walking in. And he is basically now, for all intents and purposes, a private citizen. And this is where it suddenly might look to a lot of people as being petty. Now, maybe it could be seen that way. I'm not privy to the discussions, and I haven't got the inside track as to why someone deemed it necessary to do that. But he was allowed to wear uniform. And then when you think that Prince Andrew, also now a private citizen, was allowed to wear it. And this is where you go, what's going on? And this is where this royal Shakespearean tragedy that is underneath the surface of this week is still to be played out. And this is the problem.
And the papers, of course, will be talking a little more, I'm sure, when we're freer to talk about these things, when we haven't got other things like tomorrow on our minds. I think there will be discussion of this. There can't be one rule for Andrew and another rule for Harry, I wouldn't have thought. But then, I'm not connected. And the other thing being, who makes those decisions? And as you said, it's hard to know precisely where this comes from.
Exactly. And I think, there's a lot of stuff written. And this is actually more important, is you've just got to go, look, I know a bit, but not enough. And I'm not pretending that I know everything. So you just have to say, well, clearly it just reflects the sort of slight unease that is bubbling under the surface. They are clearly trying to present as much as a united front as is possible. Because ultimately, all members of that family, taking aside the state function and the role, are still grieving a much-loved member. The matriarch, Harry, woman that he loved dearly. All of them did. So we know that when families come together, not every members of a family get on, but they all gather around at a funeral. And this is no different. But the only difference here is what we've had to see from the moment we knew at 6:32 on last Thursday week that every moment is being played out in the public view and being analysed within an inch of its life. And, body, sort of people who are trying to work out what people's body movements like, just everything. And you think, oh, no, give us a break. Why do we have to hear from those?
And some of these things, Rupert, and listen, I know it's been the longest of weeks for you, so I'm really pleased that I'm not going to put you through any more of this. But, those things can be left to another time, and we know that they will happen. Just, if you can, give me a very rapid snapshot of the way that the funeral will unfold. 6:30 tomorrow morning, isn't it, that the lying in state ends, and then it's a very well-oiled and controlled machine.
Yep, and it will be, again, from 8 o'clock, the doors of Westminster Abbey open up for the 2,000 guests to come in, and it is a well-oiled machine. Some will be turning up in the Beast, i.e. President Biden. Others will be turning up in coaches. Others will probably be making public transport to walk round to Westminster Abbey, just as if they were going to the state opening of Parliament. They will be allowed in for the 2,000 there. from 10:30 onwards, then the coffin will move from there to Westminster Abbey, and then we obviously have the service, and then we have the movement to Hyde Park, and then the journey on to Windsor Castle. A lot going on, and again, what I have noticed, and the one thing that does seem to be coming out of this, the royal family, and with the Queen's probably blessing, as she was privy to all the arrangements, she wanted it to be able that as many people can feel a part of it. And I think that is the overriding message that will come out tomorrow, that hopefully great swathes of the public will be able to turn up in wherever they can to respect her as she's sent to her final resting place, which will happen under no cameras anywhere near the place at 7:30 tomorrow night. But then finally, the family will be able to go into a period of royal mourning for a week where they can regroup and gather their thoughts, not in the full glare of publicity.
Rupert Bell, get some sleep. Thank you very much indeed. Rupert Bell, royal correspondent, and my friend of 30-odd years. We started our careers together. That's a story we told last week, so I won't bore you with it again. And just one thing to tell you. Earlier today, I heard a report, I'm not sure which clergyman said this, but it was given on good authority that the Queen herself, Queen Elizabeth, did not want a boring funeral. So I think we might see something with a bit of pace. I think we might see something reflecting the people of our nations, of these isles. I think we might see something different tomorrow, but who knows? We'll know when it unfolds. And we have, of course, coverage here live on Talk TV throughout. My name is Howard Hughes. Across the United Kingdom, round the world, this is... on Sunday nights from 10 o'clock until midnight. This a return for me to my journalistic roots and actually doing the news, which is something that I stopped doing about 10 years or so ago, but nice to return to it. If you can say nice in a circumstance like this, I found it interesting and fulfilling to be part of this. And I say that for a reason, because I was part of the death of Diana. I broke that news to London on a radio station, and that was an experience that I will never forget. In the early hours of that particular Monday morning, and then had to cover the funeral of the Queen Mother, which was a tremendous outpouring. And I think a lot of people at the time said, this is going to be a kind of rehearsal, but nothing like on the scale of what will happen when Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth dies. And I think those of us who experienced the grief and the outpouring of love for the Queen Mother saw a small version of what we're experiencing now, what we've experienced for the last 10 days. Now, there are lots of aspects to this story, and as we go into the day of the funeral, I think we need to be getting to grips with them. One of them is the policing operation, because we are seeing in London tonight, outside the window that is there in this studio, it's quietly kicking in. The police operation is another well-oiled machine and something that we've been prepared for. You know, the police have a system that you might have heard a lot about in news in other contexts lately, of mutual aid and support, where if there is something big happening in London, then officers from other forces will be called in to be part of it. In fact, as a very, very young, very fresh-faced constable, my father was called down from Liverpool Police, as it was then, to be part of the policing of the coronation. That's a long time ago. And he was brand new in the job. And he was camped on the Mall with a lot of police officers who are military. A lot of them were military guys. In fact, you know, some police still are ex-military, but my father was ex-military. So he was quite used to the fact that he was going to be camped out on the Mall for that. And he talked to me when I was a little boy and growing up with great fondness of what it was like to come down to London, the big smoke, and be part of this massive event. Well, it's happening again with the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II tomorrow. And it will all start, as you heard Rupert say, at 6:30 with the end of the lying in state. So to unpick this huge police operation and the security around it, let's talk with Peter Blexley, former Scotland Yard detective. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to my long introduction to all of that. How are you? You've been in and out of studios all week, haven't you?
I have, but I just want to say I love the story about your dad, particularly the fact that he was ex-military when he went into the police service, or the police force as it would have been then. There's a lot of people that actually bemoan the fact that former military personnel are not welcomed into the modern police with open arms.
Really?
Like they used to be. And there's a lot of people who would like to see that reversed, because there's so often a necessity for officers to have a degree or to study for a degree as part of their training process.
Well, obviously my dad's generation, and you will know this, Peter, I mean, it's all changed now, and in fact a lot of police officers get sent on to university later on. My father could have done that if he'd wanted to in later years. But, you know, there is no, and if my dad was here now, he'd say there is no substitute for what we call up north nous. You know, for what you've got in there, for the sense and the instinct of a police officer. I saw a statistic today, when we talk about the policing operation in London in the next 24 hours and beyond, presumably, that there are going to be something like 2,300 constables on the actual route of the funeral itself. Is that a number that you recognise?
Oh, and that number is actually dwarfed by the number of officers and military personnel, because they're working very much hand in glove, the armed services together with the police. That number of 2,300 is dwarfed by the number of officers involved in this operation, so much of which we don't see because it's hidden, and the work is often pretty thankless and quite heroic. And I have an expression for it. This operation spreads from the sewers to the skies and beyond. It's that big an operation. It's vast, never been seen on a scale like this before, ever, in the UK. And of course, everyone is hoping against hope that it all passes off peacefully tomorrow.
Well, you know, a lot of preparation has been done, and I know that they were out doing something that I've seen them doing in places like Bournemouth for political party conferences. You know, they're checking the drains and then sealing the manhole covers and those sorts of things, and lampposts, they're all being sealed. You know, these are the things that take the time. The public don't necessarily get to see it, but all of those things are part of a massive security operation. And one of the things, obviously having a bit of a police background with, you know, it in my family, one of the things I was wondering about was how, when you get all these people coming down from different forces, and I think the Met is very different from any other police force, obviously because of where it is and the scale of it. It's almost like a national force. You know, if you've been serving in Nottinghamshire and you get drafted in here, how's that going to be coordinated? How do they all communicate with each other? How do they know what they've got to do?
It's done on a national scale, of course, and many officers are only too happy to pack their kit bags and come down and play a part in the proceedings of the last week and, of course, tomorrow, because whilst police officers ultimately are answerable to their boss, which is a chief constable or the commissioner in the Met, so many police officers regard the late Her Majesty the Queen as the boss, the big boss, and they call her that in very affectionate terms. And so they are delighted to have come down here. They're being billeted in very nice hotels, which has put some people's noses out because they've had to move out or had their bookings cancelled, so that police officers...
So it's not like when my dad came down for the coronation, they don't put a marquee up and say, that's where you sleep.
Exactly. They are in 2022. They're not in military barracks, or a lot of them are in pretty decent hotels, but they're police officers on police wages, so they won't be paying hotel prices for the tea and coffee. I bet they've nipped round the corner shop and got a jar, and they're using the kettle in their rooms.
You know, one of the policing stories of this week, and it's come up again today, people have been talking about the right to demonstrate, and we know that we've seen a massive outpouring on the streets of London of people feeling for the Queen, you know, queuing outside this building tonight to be part of the final group of people who get to see the coffin. But there are others, and we've seen them in different parts of the United Kingdom, in Scotland and in Wales, who want to make their views known. You know, some people holding up blank pieces of paper, somebody shouting, "Not my king," and those sorts of things. And it seems to me, and it's certainly been reported in the papers and elsewhere, that there's a not understanding on the part of some, you know, rank and file police on the street of how the public order law works and how they should enforce that, and whether they should threaten arrest or indeed, you know, commit to an arrest in those cases. There are people tonight who are thinking that our right to protest, now, I wouldn't be out there protesting. I have no views on the monarchy, the royal family or anything, but if I did, I would like to think that I have the right to make my views known. if I was that way inclined, I wouldn't be choosing this occasion to do it, but there are some people who do. And the enforcement of the law in respect of those people seems to have been a bit hit and miss. What do you think?
Well, the Police Courts and Sentencing Bill, which was passed into law not so long ago, was perhaps rather bullishly applied in these past few days. And in fact, the Met Police had a pretty quick U-turn on it, because when they ushered a lawyer away for holding a blank piece of paper outside the Houses of Parliament, very soon thereafter, a group of about a dozen or so people all congregated outside Parliament, almost as a protest to the removal of that protester the previous day. And the attitude had very swiftly changed. They were allowed to stand there. They were allowed to display their banners and their slogans and all of that. And there was no dragging away of people. So fair play to the Met, perhaps, because they learnt fairly quickly that it was a bit of a PR own goal, because let's face it, somebody displaying a blank piece of paper should never face arrest, should never be ushered away. They did learn very rapidly. And I think there'll probably be a whole different debate about this, probably around Wednesday of this week, I would imagine, when the funeral and reflection on the funeral has been finished. Perhaps then will be the time for debate, not only about the protests, but what the protesters were in fact protesting about.
And it's a question of how you implement the rules, isn't it? And not being trigger happy with it. You know, you've got to read the situation. We come back to that thing that I told you about my father. He had this policeman's nous, and he could read a situation like that. I couldn't do it. We were in situations, him and me, you know, when he wasn't on duty. And he could read the situation in a way that I, just as a civilian, could never do. But I suppose you're having to work out whether something's going to kick off as a result of that person expressing that view with all of these people over here who have a completely different view. So I understand that part of it, but it seems to me that, you know, maybe a little, as you say, a little bit of an inquest on the thing, and maybe a little bit of a look at the way the rules are implemented needs to be done.
Yeah, well, many senior police officers, including the Inspectorate of Constabulary, has been saying recently that he wants officers to use discretion. There was the Chief Constable of Manchester saying that he wants to see common sense applied to policing. So kind of giving those officers the opportunities to use their instincts, to not perhaps
to not
feel
be afraid not to use them.
Absolutely, that they're not going to be hamstrung by target-driven policing.
And that takes us back. My dad retired from the coppers 30 years ago or more. So, you know, it's a long time ago. It's a different era. But you have to give people a certain amount of latitude, and they mustn't be afraid to enforce the law. And if they do it wrongly, then, you know, they're up before the Chief Constable, or they'll get a more public scrutiny for it. Final question, and again, it comes back to the news of this week, and I've thought about this too. Police numbers are stretched. Police resources are stretched. I mean, we had a great, where I live, local police station, Met Police Station. It was a big one. They've closed it. They've centralised it somewhere else. Police resources are, you know, piano wire thinly stretched like never before. What do you say to people who say that with the huge operation for what we're about to see unfold tomorrow, with that happening, police have had to take their eye off the ball with other things? I know it's inevitable in many ways, but that's a fact, isn't it? Other areas will have been neglected.
There was major disorder in Leicester this weekend, which is
ongoing. Do you think that could have been handled better if there were more people available?
Well, the acting Chief Constable went onto social media and implored people to not go onto the streets, to not be a part of it, and he said, we are dealing with it, but we're drafting in other officers. Now, did they have less officers available because some might have been down here for the funeral and the other? We shall find out. We shall see. So that might be a well-placed criticism, but we'll have to wait and see what the debrief on the Leicester situation is.
But taking it away from all of that, this is another one of those occasions where, being British, we can stand back and we can watch those guys in police uniforms and women in police uniforms tomorrow doing their job as they've been trained to do. And a lot of countries don't have that luxury. They don't have that highly skilled, highly coordinated force that we do. So I think we have to give a bit of thanks for that. Peter Bleksley, thank you very much. Thank you for doing yet another one of the round of interviews that you've been doing. Nice to see you finally.
Thank
Peter
you.
Bleksley, former Scotland Yard detective. This is Talk TV. Howard Hughes here. It is 24 minutes to 11, and again, I know we don't give time checks at night, but bearing in mind that this is the final 2 hours of what has been a cathartic week for an awful lot of people, I think it's important that we kind of do a countdown, because once we get to midnight, and as we get into Monday, things will change. And then the rest of the week, things will be very different, because politics will kick into gear again. Whoopee, say many of you, because we've got a lot of stuff to deal with, and we'll talk around some of those issues too. Now, the practicalities, we've talked about the policing. Let's take a look at the state of play with travel, especially as it relates to coming into London tonight. Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent, is online to us. Simon, thank you for doing this. It is nice to see you, as they say. It's a very great rarity. We've done 1 million phone interviews in our lives. Here you are in person. I got the sense as I passed through Waterloo Station tonight that a plan was beginning to kick in. Talk to me about the plan for the main termini, the train termini, and the main transport hubs in London. What's going to happen?
Well, I've been to a number of mainline railway stations today and over the weekend, and actually the plans are working, Howard, I'm glad to say, very well. The extraordinary thing about tomorrow, it's a bank holiday, and yet there will be absolutely the normal weekday service that you would expect from the start of the working week. That will see particularly frequent high-capacity trains from a lot of places around London in the suburbs. We'll also see the normal number of intercity express trains running into London. And on top of that, there's some really interesting things happening at a number of stations, at London Marylebone, at London St Pancras, at London King's Cross. There are so-called welfare trains being put in. Now, these are just ordinary trains out of service, being parked, for instance, at King's Cross, Platform 8, as facilities for people who need somewhere to stay warm and comfortable and safe, and there's refreshment opportunities available nearby. And the idea is that, for example, if you happen to finish queuing at 1 o'clock in the morning and your train home doesn't leave until 6 or 7, then you can go and wait there. You'll be safe, you'll be warm, and then you can hopefully get a bit of rest and catch your train home.
But think about how unprecedented, Simon, this is, isn't it? I mean, we are living through a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Who would have thought that train operators would put on trains for people's welfare? I used to have to pass through Waterloo Station very, very late at night after doing my show here, and I would run to the station. And if anybody, tried to lie across a seat or anything like that, they're pretty quickly shown the door. This is something of a different scale and magnitude.
Yes, it is, and it is a very caring demonstration by the rail industry of how much they wish to pay tribute to Her Majesty by looking after the millions of people who have, over the period of national mourning, been travelling to London and will most certainly, perhaps right now, be making plans to travel to the capital tomorrow. And it being a bank holiday, all tickets are off-peak, so you're not going to be paying a huge amount to get to London and back. Availability is going to be a challenge on some routes, but of course you haven't got the normal commuters coming in because almost everybody has the day off. But what you will find, and this is actually where the rail industry is now really concentrating and concerned, is what happens in the afternoon once the London events have been over, once the Queen's coffin has been taken to Windsor. Could it be that 1 million people suddenly all decide, right, well, we're going to go home now. We paid our respects. Let's go to the appropriate terminus station, whether that's London, Paddington or Liverpool Street or Victoria or wherever. And they are really concerned that there will be this massive influx of people turning up. Now, my advice and their advice is just be patient. The later you can travel in the day, the more comfortable a journey you are likely to have. And furthermore, and we're talking about unprecedented things. For the first time I can remember, and this includes the London Olympics a decade ago, if you look at, for example, London Paddington to Bath and Bristol, there will be trains and express service running every hour through Monday night into Tuesday morning. Same thing happening from London St Pancras going to Leicester and Derby.
So we need to be getting the message across, don't we? Which, you know, I'm grateful that you're doing it now, Simon, that, you know, people don't have to instantly say, right, time to go, got to get on a train right now. They can stagger the trip because there will be transport available. Sometimes, as we both know, these things have their own momentum, though, don't they?
They said, yeah.
I can remember being on duty on air from just outside Buckingham Palace in 2002 for a huge royal event, and there was a fly past and all sorts of things. It had a very definite cut-off time. It ended, you know, it wasn't a grey area. It ended when it ended. And I can remember there was the most enormous throng procession of people sweeping through London, but in a dignified way. Nobody was running or anything like that. And I noticed that some people were going off to restaurants, and some people were, you know, trying to, as I was, trying to quickly get to a station. But not everybody was doing that. So I think, by the looks of it, and tell me what you think, we're going to have to try for once. We've tried this before, but I think it might work, to rely on the common sense of the British people.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I've spent a lot of the weekend walking around the Westminster area. I mean, you can't really get around any other way. By the way, the Tubes network has been working pretty well through the weekend. It will continue to do so on Monday. Bear in mind, though, that for the first time since the COVID pandemic, we've actually had visitor numbers or people using the tube getting on and off trains at key stations close to Westminster, which have been way in excess of pre-COVID times. So those trains are going to be busy. There will also be, and I'm sure you found this, Howard, as well, just walking around the capital, quite often you don't have much choice about where you are going to be walking. Once you sort of start going, you get into a flow of people who are being directed by police and by security staff, and you're just going to keep going. And basically my rule of thumb this weekend has been, wherever you're going, assume it will take 3 times as long as it does in normal times. And of course, many streets blocked off completely tomorrow.
I think that's the best takeaway point of all. Just allow more time. If you're going to be in London to do this, allow more time. Thank you very much, Simon Calder. Kind of you to do that for us tonight. I know you've had a lot to do. Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent. Howard Hughes here, Sunday night, in place of my usual Unexplained show. Dave in Hull, thank you for your text, Dave. I know that you've been a regular Unexplained person for some time. And I'm sorry that you feel disappointed in me that I'm doing a show like this tonight. But, you know, there is no way that I could have put on The Unexplained tonight. I couldn't go to my boss and say, we want to do The Unexplained. And I'll tell you honestly, as much as I love The Unexplained, and it's back next week, do you honestly think that it would have been appropriate in the final hours of this impactful week, as we go into the day of the funeral of the Queen, on this night of all the nights? I don't think we could have done The Unexplained. And, you know, I'm reverting to news type, and that's what my boss would expect. And I tell you the truth, Dave, honestly, I think he's right. And I'm sorry you say that you won't have any respect for anything I say in future. I suspect I know which side of the argument you're coming to it from. But Dave, you can't have it your way all the time. You know, maybe that's a lesson in life. I don't know. But it's nice to hear from you, and I really do hope that you continue to watch The Unexplained. It returns at 10 p.m. next week, come hell or high water. But we have things to do tonight, and this is where I revert to my newsman training. And, you know, it's been an interesting experience for me, and I feel privileged to have been a little part of history here, and that the fact that the company gave me the chance to do it, you know, they didn't take me off during these periods. So I think, you know, fair play to them. From me, all right, let's get into important discussions of what is to happen after the funeral, because life has to return to normal, and we would have been deeply embroiled in politics at this point had the events of the last 10 days not transpired. Liz Truss took over, of course, was seen in as Boris Johnson was seen out by Her Majesty the Queen as her last act. And now we have a completely different government, staffed by completely different people, who I'm hoping, for all our sakes, have been working behind the scenes during this period to roll out a plan because we need one. Let's get on Trevor Kavanagh, political columnist at The Sun. Trevor, nice to speak with you. How are you?
Hi, Howard. I'm fine.
Trevor, never in our lifetimes have we seen a new Prime Minister arrive and a current monarch leave us almost simultaneously. Do you think that the system, the way that our constitutional system, our unwritten constitutional system of government was tested by this? Everything seems to have worked very smoothly, but do you think that any of it was creaking behind the scenes?
Well, I think there are two ways of looking at this, Howard. One of them is that this has been a suspension of politics for the duration of the 10 days of mourning. But it has given the government, the new government, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, and the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, that period of grace in which they can visibly work away behind the scenes to prepare for a momentous week over and above the momentous events of the last 10 days. And while they appear fairly serene on the surface, they've been paddling away underneath on all sorts of measures which are going to be unveiled over the coming days.
That is gratifying to know, and I'm glad that they have been, and I would have expected them to do that. Does this mean that come Tuesday morning, we are going to see the distillation of all of that effort that they haven't been able to talk about for the last 10 days?
Yes, we're going to see Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, action-packed with announcements on all sorts of reforms, and particularly the economic reforms. A mini budget on Friday with the new Chancellor spelling out exactly where the money is going, that they're going to raise by various means, mostly borrowing in the first instance, to protect the most vulnerable from the worst excesses of rising gas and electricity bills. So you're going to have energy bills capped at a fairly huge cost, something like an estimated 150 billion. And on top of that, you're going to spend another 30 billion cancelling those tax increases that were announced in the last budget by Rishi Sunak. Those are the national insurance contributions and the business taxes.
So we're going to see a very different agenda. And I don't know whether you've noticed, I'm sure you have, maybe you coined it, I don't know, Trevor, but somebody coined the phrase Trussonomics today, and they've started to use it. I don't know whether it's going to stick. It sounds like it might. But we're going back to the era, aren't we, of trickle-down economics, it seems. We're going to see a totally different approach to how things were done previously. It's going to be a pretty important week.
Yes, it is. And for all the professions of fealty to Boris Johnson, this is not going to be a continuity Boris Johnson government. A whole raft of measures which were precious to him, for instance, the green levy on fuel bills, they are going to be swept away. Fracking, which he's done his best in the past to prevent, will be given a chance again. I think there will be fracking by the end of the year, maybe a little in the new year. And a whole range of things like North Sea oil reserves are going to be tapped once more. So the green revolution is going to be put on hold at the very least. Plus a number of other measures, the plans to have free ports scattered around the country are going to be turbocharged with tax benefits for people to go and work outside London. And this will be a huge boost for levelling up, which was one of the policies precious to Boris, but which were not really delivered very successfully or effectively in his time.
He did talk a lot about free ports, didn't he? But we didn't hear very much detail about that. It will be interesting to see that. But look, there are things that need to be, don't they? They need to face the white heat of debate on the floor of the Chamber of the House of Commons. For example, removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. I'm not sure, the more I think about it, that is the right thing to do. How are they going to sell that to the people who are going to face a really hard winter? All of us, I am, most of the people I know am, that one of the first things they're going to do, it seems, is to scrap the cap on bankers' bonuses in a bid to show the world that the United Kingdom is open for business. I think the world knew that anyway, didn't it?
Well, I don't think they did. In many ways, the big problem for Britain and the failure to grow properly over the last few years is the huge number of regulations that have been imposed for various reasons, either for political advantage, for a good look, EU regulation, all sorts of things which have burdened the British economy. And what we do need, and it's difficult to sell, I admit, and I think it's been badly handled from the outset. It shouldn't have been the very first thing that was revealed by the new Chancellor or the new government, was the bankers' bonuses. That is really the politics of envy. I think that is an attempt to stop the bank bonuses that look very greedy to the average punter, but have to be earned, and they really do achieve huge revenues for the tax authorities.
We know that they, and of course the theory is, isn't it, that the money that they earn through their bonuses, and also the tax breaks that are given to big business, all of that money, this is the trickle-down effect. Supposedly, those people are going to spend it in the economy, and that will benefit everybody. But the problem with it is that in the past, it hasn't always worked like that, has it?
Well, no, there are always excesses, but what you have to do is have a bonfire of the regulations, which are clogging up the economy in so many ways, not just in bankers' bonuses, but the regulations on green energy and so on. But also, they've got to do something very, very soon and quite drastically, and unpopularly with conservative voters in particular, and that is the housing crisis. They have to start finding a way of reforming the planning regulations so that houses can be built to satisfy the huge demand there is for housing in a clogged market, which is unburdened by stamp duty for one thing, but also rising prices. They're totally unaffordable because of the scarcity of good housing.
So a bonfire of the regulations, of course, as you said, the working hours directive, which was something that we inherited from Europe, which we are not a part of anymore, that's going to go. So there will be more freedom for people to work more hours. I'm not sure when I look at it, and I need the government this week to persuade me, and so do lots of other people watching this now. Why should I think that's a great thing for the economy here? Why is that a good thing for individual people who may find themselves working longer and harder, ultimately for the same or for less?
Well, it's a matter of the cosmetics of this, but the fact is that regulation dampens the economy, the incentive to work, the ability. Lots of people want to work longer hours because they earn more money, and many of them have more than one job, of course, but they do actually. There is demand for longer working hours. It's hard to believe in this day and age when we can't get anybody to work in the economy at all by the look of it. But regulation for regulation's sake is a non-capitalist way of running a capitalist economy, and you need to free it up and make it flexible so that it attracts investment. I mean, there is a huge wall of money out there waiting to come into post-Brexit Britain. It's been waiting for 6 years. Right. It should have started pouring in.
So, Trevor, you think the starting pistol will be fired this week? The only problem is that the last few weeks, and I'm looking at this, trying to stand in the middle of it like you do when you're doing a show like this. But, I lived through the Thatcher years. I saw all of that. I understood. I had a lot of time. I used to interview him a lot for people like Norman Tebbit. As a person, he was wonderful to deal with, whatever you may have thought of his politics. They were conviction politicians, and this was the conviction. But, now we are seeing the state of our water industry, the state of the rail franchises, that some of them have been failing for a long time. There was talk about, some of them maybe going back into public ownership for a time. That approach to the economy wasn't a rip-roaring success the first time round. It's taken 30 years for us to find that out. And now we're going to get more of the same, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that we need to know a lot more before we can really decide exactly which direction this government is going to go. But the indicators are that there will be less unnecessary regulation, but where regulation is needed, as in the water industry and other utilities, then it must be policed properly so that they aren't allowed simply to dump sewage into the rivers and oceans. They aren't allowed to allow their reservoirs to crack and leak, and pipes to leak more than we use in actual water consumption. So these are the points where regulation is good and needs to be enforced.
So you're saying that we're going to get, and we need more free enterprise, but that free enterprise, I think, as all of us, many of us, most of us would agree, needs to be controlled. There needs to be proper, effective regulation with teeth. And of course, we've got the Chancellor's big statement coming up, the mini budget later this week. So it's going to be an exciting, interesting and different week. Trevor Kavanagh, thank you very much for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
Trevor Kavanagh, political columnist at The Sun, a man who has been there, seen it and done it over the years. We have a very busy week coming up politically, but we have tomorrow to get through first. We'll talk more about that coming next here on Talk TV. Stay here.
As we bid farewell to our cherished monarch, join Talk TV to reflect on an extraordinary life of service and dedication.
Well, not as advertised, the Unexplained with Howard Hughes tonight. This is the final hour of a momentous week that is a one-of-a-kind, really. You know, you're not going to live through another week quite like this one. Not in my lifetime, and not in your lifetime, no matter how young you might be. So I suppose we're looking back over the last week and we're looking forward to what is to come in this next week. We have the Queen's funeral tomorrow, hours from now, and that well-oiled machine, the policing, the security, the transportation to get people in and out, and all the coverage of the event by the media, including our own Tom Newton-Dunn, who is on from 10 until 3 tomorrow here at Talk TV with full coverage. All of that will be happening, and it will happen seamlessly. And then, as you heard with Tom Newton-Dunn, as you heard rather with Trevor Kavanagh, political correspondent of many years' experience, man who's seen it all and done it all, then we race headlong into the political maelstrom once again, and we get into the party conference. What do you think about that, by the way? I was going to ask him about that, but there's never enough time to ask everything you want to. You know, why are we, even if they are truncated, which I think the Labour one is going to be, I'm not sure about the Conservative one, even if it's different, should they really be having party conferences, which are mostly about party business, whatever they might tell you, at this time, when we've had 6 weeks more of not a lot of government, because we were dealing with the exit of one Prime Minister and the entrance of another Prime Minister, and, you know, the formulation of a whole bunch of new policies, which we're going to see outlined. Is it really the right time to be having a little jolly off to, I think, Labour is going to Liverpool, and where are the Conservatives going? I'll be told by somebody, but I think it's a resort that they're going to. I think I've got that right, but I don't know. You know, is it the right time to be embarking on party conferences and waving the flag for your party when the country is sorely in need of a little bit of TLC, isn't it? After everything that we've been through, and ahead of the winter that many people will have to endure. Personally, you know, at least I am allowed an opinion here. I don't understand why, as much as they might try and explain it to me, why politicians think that it's a good idea to go ahead with the party conferences, but maybe they can tell me again, and maybe I'll get it this time. Coming soon, Michael Cole, veteran political correspondent, a man you may have seen over many, many years, and of course worked for Mohammed Al-Fayed for some years, including the period of Diana's death, which is when I got to know him. So we're going to get his take on all of this quite soon. But this show, I told you, is going to be about light and shade, and indeed it is. And my old friend Mike Batt, music industry legend, I think is the only way to describe him. You know, a national treasure is Mike Batt. He's online to us now. Mike, thank you for staying up to do this. How are you?
Hi, Howard. Am I the light or the shade?
You are definitely you are the light. You are the way
good.
And the light, I would say.
I'm happy to be here.
And listen, I'm really sorry about the way I said thank you for staying up, as if you would be, you know, in bed with a cup of Horlicks normally. I know that's not so.
My cocoa's already got cold. I'm wholly personally responsible.
And you've let the cat out and you walked the dog, and here you are talking to me. You know, music industry legend, I think some people won't know the whole scale of it. But I looked again today, and we've talked so many times, so I've checked your biography out, and it's always growing, many times. You have one of the longest biographies on the internet. I mean, I don't know, sometimes when I apply for jobs, right, because I've been around for so many years, I have to leave things out.
Yes.
I wonder if you've ever been tempted, because you've done so much, to make it a bit shorter and leave a few things out.
Yeah. I mean, let's just take this, for example, our short chat now. We couldn't possibly talk about everything, and also, and by the way, I'm not pushing that we should talk about a particular thing, but you know, I do interviews these days for a thing which I am promoting, which is a project, right? We don't need to go into it now, but this is just the theory of it.
Okay.
Now, when I do interviews, people quite naturally, very kindly, and I'm delighted that they do, want to talk about, you know, my career, and so I'm really happy to talk about my career. But what it does do, as you say, you have to edit sometimes, because you can't talk about all of it. You know, I can't talk about both Elkie Brooks and you know, Steel Eye Span and the Wombles and da 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 da. Here I'm giving you a whole list.
I mean,
of stuff.
look, you know, you could Katie Melua, and who else have you worked with? Justin Hayward, you know, legend of the Moody Blues, and Status Quo, and Huey Lewis. I think with or without the news, you know, you really have been there and done it. And also, you were for a while deputy chairman of the British phonographic industry.
That's
essentially, you know, the record business in the UK personified. But
indeed, well, I am very interested in the workings and the machinations of that side of the you know, of the music business.
Gee, it's changed though, hasn't it? It's so different now.
Yeah, indeed.
You co-wrote Bright Eyes, didn't you, for Art Garfunkel?
No, I didn't. I wrote it.
You wrote it? Okay. Are you still in touch with Art Garfunkel? He's one cool dude, isn't he?
I am. I had lunch with him about a couple of years. You always think it was only last year, but of course you add COVID onto that, and it's 3 years ago. But I had lunch with him about 2.5 years ago, I guess it was. And he seems in good spirits. His son is doing very well in Germany. He has Art Garfunkel Jr. now, who's making records mainly for the Schlager market in Germany. I don't know whether you know what that is. That's the kind of the middle of the road German-speaking market. And they've made a father and son album together, which I thought was quite interesting.
Oh, excellent. I'd love to be hearing that. I didn't even know he had a son who was in the business. But he's always seemed to me, the only reason I ask you about, and I promise I'll get on to the royal material, but he's always seemed to me to be such a cool dude. You know, he's an actor. There was a time, I think, when Simon and Garfunkel split for a bit, because he went off to make a movie around 1980 or so, and I think they came back to do some concerts together and stuff. And he's a really good actor. But you always expect a guy who's got that beautiful lyrical voice that can go to real highs. You always think that his speaking voice is going to be up in that range, but actually when he talks, he's down there, isn't he? He's kind of...
Well, I know about bass, but he's certainly got a light voice. He's got a I still think he's got the speaking voice of what we would call a tenor, a pop tenor, but he has this lovely high range that he can access, you know, with it's really partly the artistry of doing it. It's partly technique, actually. But he has a lovely natural voice. Yes, you're right.
I'm sorry, I'm being so indulgent because I'm such a fan of Art Garfunkel, and I think he is a you know, in an industry full of cool dudes. Yeah, I think he's one of the coolest. So you've done it.
I was driving down the Edgware Road once with him, and we went past a Garfunkel's hamburger joint.
Yes.
And of course, they're nothing to do with him.
Do people think they are?
Oh, we could nip into my restaurant and get a hamburger. And of course, as I say, he was just joking, but that, you know, he's a very easygoing guy.
I wonder what it's like when Art Garfunkel walks into Garfunkel's. You know, that's going to be the double take of all double takes. You've worked with a number of royal outfits, I don't to call them that, including the Royal Philharmonic. You made an album, I think, called Philharmonia or Philharmania? Philharmania you made.
Philharmania, we called it, yeah. And for the reason, obviously, it's the play on words is that it was slightly manic. Because a lot of them, sometimes I mean, I can do straight, and I love doing sort of what you might call straight filmic or classical type of orchestration. But I sometimes like to go a bit crazy and end up more in a Stravinsky-Bartók end of, and maybe a bit of Frank Zappa thrown in. And I took a few chances on that album, Philharmonia. But I've worked with the RPO not only on rock type stuff, but also I did the very first digital recording of the whole Planet Suite, which I conducted at Watford Town Hall with them, and we recorded it with the Abbey Road mobile unit. And as I say, that was the very first 21-bit digital recording of that piece. I'm very proud of it, actually.
A little bit of history. I mean, you've never been afraid to mix it up. You know, I can remember even in the Wombles days, the Wombles had a song that was partly classical that was called Minuetto Allegretto. See, I remember. Indeed. I remember it well.
Yeah.
My kind of era.
It was a co-write with Wolfgang Mozart. Albeit he had no say in the matter.
Well, who knows? You know, who knows? He might have been influencing you from somewhere else. Now, royal connections, because you worked for the Royal Philharmonic, worked with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm guessing you cannot go through, and we had, you probably know him too, Mike Reed, former Radio 1 DJ,
I know Mike,
old friend. You cannot go through a life in the music business, the entertainment business of many decades, without tangentially touching the royal family in some way. So, you know, this is a very clumsy way of saying, have you got any royal stories to tell?
Well, how long have you got, really?
An ocean of time.
The thing about royal stories is that, one, dare I use the word royal one feels that, you know, you're kind of being indiscreet if you say too much. But
it's only you and me talking. Don't forget that, Mike.
Exactly, no one's listening. So you know, I actually I've thought about this when I've talked about, you know, I mean, I've done quite a lot of work for royal commissions. I did the the Golden Wedding Anniversary. The military commissioned me to do a piece for the Royal Tournament for the Queen and Prince Philip, which coincided with my own parents' Golden Wedding Anniversary. So it was very nice for me to be able to do it for them both. That was the first time I met the Queen, and since then I've done quite a few things. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time about maybe nearly 10 years ago, where for a period of years I was in and out of Buckingham Palace like a yo-yo, actually. A very slow yo-yo, not you know. But what would happen is something might be needed, and like a piece of music, or I would go up there and maybe conduct an orchestra for an occasion, like we did. I was asked to put on a concert for youth in the arts. So it was to encourage the arts and the youthful end of the arts. And so we found a young symphony orchestra, and we used the younger end of the English National Ballet, and we did a whole evening of different versions of Romeo and Juliet. So West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet by Tchaikovsky, and the Queen came along, various other senior royals, and the great and good from the entertainment business. It was all done in the biggest room there, which is the ballroom, of course, the one where they do all the state investitures. And
do you see the royal family coming and going when you're there doing something for them? I mean, did you see the Queen? Was she popping in and out?
Well, the Queen doesn't pop in and out that much, because it's a very big place, and I don't think I think she quite considerately doesn't want people to embarrassingly bump into her, you know, and not know what to do.
Right, so this notion of the Queen being discreet in her own home.
Yeah, I mean, the feeling that you walk down a corridor that might be what they call the Master's Corridor, which is the business end of the palace. And if you saw the Queen coming the other way, you would brave it out and nod politely as a bow as you walk past the Queen. But she wouldn't design it that way, because she wouldn't like to embarrass visitors. But when she does come around, like she did, for example, when I used to conduct the orchestra at the Buckingham Palace Christmas party on several occasions.
Really?
I'd see her coming down the corridor, and I'd stop the orchestra. She would see me, like, I don't know, 100 yards away, probably, right down the picture gallery. And so she'd know I was ready to stop the orchestra. I knew she was ready to arrive. So it was just a question of almost eye contact, really. And then
so
I
you
would
learned,
stop.
because you worked with the Queen so much, you learned to read her.
Well, no, you learn how to behave in her presence. Yeah. And what she does is she's very, very good. We're talking about her in the present tense, but I still think of her, and I don't apologize for that, as in the present tense, because to me she is still a life force, you know. Forgive the sort of slightly spiritual, you know, angle to that. But when you say a thing like this, I'm not telling tales out of school. You ask me a question, I'm just answering it. And by the way, my feeling about the fact that when one might be being indiscreet by saying certain things is that one's only saying nice things. You know, when one is being indiscreet, it's when one tells tales and purveys gossip. But I just to give an idea to you of how well, slightly sense of humor this is, but it slightly shows her sense of humor, but it also shows her consideration. On that one occasion I told you about, where we did a concert for the performing arts and for the youth, the various different youth performers. I was down at one end of the state ballroom, and she, as the sort of main audience member, was down at the other end. So in order to get to the meeting and greeting line, I had to run the length of the ballroom, down a corridor which was adjacent to the ballroom, to arrive in time for her to have got to the very short walk, which was at the other end. So I literally had to get off the podium from the conducting side of it. Mind you, the master of the household knew this, so he might have whispered in her ear. And then
Mom, can you walk a little more slowly? Yes, yeah.
I careered down, like literally belted it, like trying to do the 100 yards, to where the sort of shaking hands bit was, where about 8 of us were lined up to shake her hand. And I could see that she was really, diplomatically hovering, talking to Prince Andrew was there, the girls were there, Prince Andrew's girls, and 1 or 2 other dignitaries and various courtiers. And she could sort of see me zooming down the corridor, and she sort of deliberately kind of turned slightly to the right and sort of hovered, almost like treading water, till she could see that was in the way. And then she came formally past, and nothing else was said, but there was a sort of wry smile, as if to say, well, you may. I literally skidded into place.
These are wonderful vignettes. And, you know, most of us don't get to see or experience these things. But what we're learning is that the Queen was aware of everything that was going on around her and actually cared about the people who were doing things for her, like you were. Great stories, Mike. Lovely to speak again. Nice to see you finally. Please take care. Thank you very much.
Very nice to see you, Howard, and you take care and have a good show.
Thank you. Mike Batt. About completely different things, and for those of you who've been asking, which you have been fairly consistently for the last week, yes, it will return in 7 days from now. But I think this is a point in our lives where we have to take a little bit of a break. What's that word that they use in universities? It's an interregnum, it's a break, it's a pause of necessity because of the events, momentous they have been over the last 10 days. You know, those of us in the media have been prepared for these things all of our careers. But when it actually happens, and you actually have to fulfill the requirements of the documents that organisations, and I did work for them for a while, the BBC constantly update and change. It's one reason that there are middle managers. They spend a lot of their time updating documents and procedures. So we all knew that the procedures were there. And here we are in commercial television and radio, just as they will be the BBC, my colleagues still there. You know, we're living those procedures right now, and you will have seen the results over this last week or so. With me now, a man who I used to speak with on a very frequent basis in my days at Capital Radio in London on the breakfast shift, Michael Cole, former political correspondent, superb broadcaster, and a man who became a friend over a frenzied period in both our lives, Michael, around the time of Diana's departure from this world. And your phone never stopped ringing.
Very, very sad days 25 years ago. We miss her still. I certainly miss her still. She was a wonderful person. But you know, Howard, you've hit upon it. We are living through days of history. These are momentous events. What we're seeing here in our capital city has never been seen anywhere else in the world, ever, and never will again. Tonight in Buckingham Palace, 1,000 world leaders and their spouses. Phenomenal. There hasn't been a gathering like that since the Congress of Vienna after the Battle of Waterloo and the end of the Napoleonic Wars, or arguably the Peace Conference at Versailles after the First World War, 1919. Compared with what's going on here, the General Assembly of the United Nations is almost nothing. It's an extraordinary time, and what I can find very difficult to reconcile, having gone with the Queen around the world, from frozen tundra of North Saskatchewan to the South Island of New Zealand to the Great Hall of the People to Kathmandu in the shadow of the Himalayas to the West Indies and Belize, is that in that coffin is the small, bright, blue-eyed woman who has done a tremendous feat of reigning for 70 years. She pledged her service to this country when she was 21, that's 75 years ago. And my goodness, hasn't she fulfilled it?
She stuck with it. And I think the moving thing about the last 10 days or so is how she was, whatever, and you know, I'm getting all kinds of emails and tweets, and some people are not monarchist and they don't want to be hearing this stuff, and you know, I understand that, it's a free country, you have a right to say this. But as you said, Michael, here is somebody who said, I'm going to take this job on, this is my responsibility, it falls to me, and I'm going to stick with it. She could have abdicated, she didn't. You know, 2 days before she left us, she was seeing out Boris Johnson and in the same dignified way seeing in Liz Truss. So it's as if she's handed the future to us and then said, I have to go now.
There was nothing grand about Her Majesty the Queen. She was not grand. The job was grand, but she was a very modest person. At heart, she was a countrywoman, happiest when she was the Squire of Sandringham or the Laird of Balmoral in a pair of jodhpurs and a hacking jacket with a Hermes scarf tied under her chin, trotting around. And what an, I mean, it's a human being, of course, doing an extraordinary job. But imagine, if you will, you're born in 1926, the year of the general strike here, a year of crisis. The BBC was only 4 years old. The Irish Free State was not quite 4 years old. She never went to school. When she joined the Brownies came to her. And at the age of 10, when her dear Uncle David, Edward VIII, abdicated, she became the heir apparent. What a burden. And how did she cope with it? Because her father schooled her and said, just do your duty and understand the nuances of the British Constitution and everything will be okay. I always think it was probably a blessing that she was not burdened with an overactive imagination, because she didn't have to imagine anything. It was all happening around her. And she's seen the best of people, the worst of people, the best of times and the worst too.
And she had to meet people who she may not have liked but show them the courtesy that went with the office that she held.
I love the little story because when this madman Michael Fagan broke into Buckingham Palace...
And ended up in the Queen's bedroom.
Yes, sitting there talking to her. And afterwards, and of course the Queen got out of this situation. I mean, what a chapter of accidents, appalling, it really was. David McNee, who was the Metropolitan Commissioner, thought very long about resigning, and maybe he should have done.
Well, it was astonishing.
The Queen's maid said to her, "Well, Ma'am, I don't know how you managed to do that." She said, "Well, I've spent the whole of my life talking to people I don't know."
So it was a beautiful preparation. That reminds me of in a line. I mean, there must be a fund of stories for a book of things that the Queen has said, but there was a lineup where a broadcaster, I can't remember who it was asked about. There's the lineup where the Queen is greeting these people, and the Queen starts to talk to this famous broadcaster, and he says, I'm constantly getting questions about my salary these days, Ma'am. And she said, "I know the feeling," which I thought was just beautiful. You have to have having the right words for the right time is a very great skill I have found in my life.
Well, a couple of other broadcasters who you may remember, when Anthony Carthew was the ITN royal correspondent, he introduced a very famous and very good reporter called Keith Graves, who worked at the BBC. And he said, "Ma'am, this is Keith Graves from the BBC." So she said, "Oh, I tend to watch ITN." So Graves said, "I didn't come here to be insulted." and they burst into laughter, and she led the laughter because she realised she'd been had, and what can you do in that situation? Very, very rarely did the mask fall, very rarely. But there was in 1985 a Commonwealth Heads of Government conference in Nassau, and the Royal Yacht was there, and the highlight is the banquet on board the Royal Yacht. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Lyndon Pindling, took 11 Commonwealth heads on a booze cruise around the island, and they didn't get back till very late. And the Queen was most concerned that the chefs who had prepared the banquet would see their work spoiled. That's what she was worried about. Anyway, eventually these people stagger up the gangplank, and the Queen was arranging the family photograph. Big, important moment. And she was thinking about the time, because punctuality is the courtesy of kings and queens. And when we were almost ready, we were filming, and the press secretary, Michael Shea, was saying to the cameraman, "Are you ready?" And the Queen said, "Michael, you're in the way. Get out of the way." And then she suddenly realised that we were filming, and she gave us the most wonderful wide smile, because I think she actually rather enjoyed being caught out. She very rarely showed anything like that. And it was just a great moment, and the smile was perfect.
And of course, those sorts of admonitions were normally left to the Duke of Edinburgh, who had more succinct ways of putting them.
Well, that's true.
How do you think, Michael, because you can look back at a number of decades of this, how do you think that your colleagues of 2022 have handled this once-in-a-lifetime event?
Very good. I think they've done very well. I've just been reviewing the papers, and I love newspapers. I don't always love everything that's in them, but I love newspapers. And the collection of newspapers for tomorrow morning, the day of the funeral, it's art on the run. There's some wonderful pictures, wonderful use of pictures. The Metro in particular has chosen to reproduce the wonderful romantic portrait of the Queen by Pietro Annigoni, a wonderful Italian painter, who is very romantic. I mean, it's way over the top. The Queen was a strikingly beautiful young woman, but even he has gone further. And of course, it's a great picture. It fills the whole of the front page of the Metro. But what it doesn't show, unfortunately, is Pietro Annigoni. He put himself in the picture. In the background is a sylvan scene with a lake, and there's a little boat, and Annigoni is sitting on it. And I mean, it's well worth looking up. And the other page, and the Buckingham Palace have issued a final portrait of her, smiling, wearing the clasp that her parents gave her on her 18th birthday. But you know, I wrote a letter on the morning after her death, on the last Friday, Gosh, it's so soon. On the 9th, anyway. She died on the 8th. And I ended up by saying that history would remember her as Elizabeth the Great. And that sparked quite a correspondence, and people have said, no, that's wrong, he has got that wrong. It's Elizabeth the Good, or Elizabeth the Kind, or Elizabeth the Wise. What is interesting is everybody has a view. Everybody has a view. I was down at Buckingham Palace today. I've never seen scenes like it. I'm 79. I was born in London. I've been here my whole life. I've never seen what I've seen today, never. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that nobody's telling those people to go there. Nobody's ordering them to go there. They're not being bussed. They're not being given flags and told to wave them. They're going there of their own accord. This isn't North Korea. This is not a parade in Red Square for Mr. Putin. They're going there, and why are they going there? Well, let's use the word respect. Let's use a bigger word, affection. Let's use the biggest word, love. And a lot of people, it's an uncanny thing, they almost project their own lives on the royal family. Oh, yes, this one got married when our daughter got married, and this one had a baby when our daughter had a baby, and all of that stuff. And people are relating to it in a very personal way. I think it's very moving. It's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. And the atmosphere
and we won't see
is
it's
great.
Like again.
No.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you paint a wonderful picture of what life was like. You know, you said briefly at the top of this that, you know, I went, to wherever it was, Niagara Falls and wherever with the Queen. It sounds like a never-ending jolly. Of course, it isn't. It's a lot of hard... Like all of these things, it may appear to be amazing on the screen, but it's a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and it is. And also, you have to, I presume, you can accept the plaudits and you can get the smiles from Her Majesty and others. But there are times when you might get a bit of, what's that word, disapprobation from there. And one of your successors, Nicholas Witchell, you know what I'm going to say.
Yes.
The microphone that wasn't supposed to pick up the then Prince Charles, describe him as awful. There's that man.
I can't understand that man.
Awful, can't it? Awful man.
I think they've mended their fences since.
Well, I hope so, because I always wondered for Nicholas Witchell, who you must know, I don't know.
Of course I know.
How he came back.
Well, I think if you look at it, listen, we're professional broadcasters. If you look at it in a professional sense, it made Nicholas unsackable. The BBC could never sack him unless they say the management was reacting.
Was kowtowing to the requirements of the palace, which they didn't.
A couple of we have a constitutional monarchy. We're very lucky to have that because it is a safeguard. It's a barrier. It's a bulwark against extremism and dictatorship. Because at the end of the day, the monarch has to sign off the legislation, and if confronted, if push came to the shove, they could always refuse, and that would cause a crisis. But I tell you one thing, and we've seen Canada here, second biggest country in the world. Canada is held together by two things: the Canadian National Railway, which goes right away across the country, and Her Majesty the Queen, because even President Macron, who we saw walking into Buckingham Palace tonight, he said the Queen speaks absolutely perfect French. She didn't go to school, but she had a good tutor. And she continued to go there in the worst of the times of the separatism in Quebec. And that was very much appreciated by those who believe in a federal Canada. And people get it wrong about republics because, you know, there's always a good argument for a republic. I'm not denying that. But we must remember that when the republic became corrupt in ancient Rome, what did they replace it with? They replaced it with a monarchy. And it's a complete...
It's the way of things.
It's a misapprehension to think that the royal family or the king is against republics. For instance, I mean, the monarch reigns, does not rule. Therefore, sovereignty lies with the government. So whether the government is in Ottawa or in Canberra or in Wellington or in Westminster, whatever the government wants, the monarch, the head of state, is behind that because it's been voted for by the people of those countries. It's democratically elected. For instance, I was in wonderful, beautiful South Australia, in Adelaide, the University of South Australia, and the Queen was presiding at a graduation ceremony, and there was a lull in the proceedings, and at the back of the hall, somebody shouted, "Long live the Republic of Australia," you see. And my microphone picked up what the Duke of Edinburgh said. He said, "Sounds like a good idea," you see. So they're not against that. What the Queen was very, very hot on was the Commonwealth. Commonwealth was partly established by her father, and she believes in its primacy and its usefulness. And the Commonwealth
Is it going to fall apart, Michael?
No.
Well, what about Antigua and Barbuda and other countries? I mean, New Zealand are looking at the prospect,
No. New Zealand, of course, was always a very progressive country, the first country to introduce a welfare state more than 100 years ago. They showed the way on pensions and healthcare and things like this. No, New Zealand may become a republic. Australia may become a republic. It's up to their people. But the Queen, and I'm sure Prince Charles, and he's head of the Commonwealth. Now, it's the most important thing for the Queen that is maintained, because it's an association of free nations, democratic nations, believe in the rule of law, and are liberal. And it's not just...
And you think that penny will drop with all of those nations? Like I was reading in the papers today that Jacinda Ardern says that there will be consideration of this, or there might be.
I'm sure they have to consider it. It's quite right and proper.
It's a debate we could have for a very long time, Michael. You know what it's like when you've got somebody counting you down out of this. And I after having spoken to you on a telephone so many times, to get to finally meet you after 20-odd years
it's my pleasure.
But, we can look forward to the prospect of King Charles. It will be different. Just in a couple of words, what do you think will be the characteristics of his...
Well, the question is, will he be a good king? I say he has to be a good king for the maintenance of the House of Windsor, for the health and prosperity of this country. Our unwritten constitution works. Many places it doesn't work. Many unhappy countries would be envious of the system that we have. Let's stick with it, and let's give him a chance, as we're giving our new Prime Minister a chance. 2 newbies.
Interesting times in which we live, Michael. Thank you very much for that. Michael... And for those of you who are pining for the unexplained, it's kind of Monty Python, is it? Pining for the fjords. If you're pining for the unexplained, then I can tell you that just a couple of hours ago, 2 new podcasts were published, edition 663 and 664. So if you want to check out my website, not right now, theunexplained.tv, they're there waiting for you. Please visit the website. We need you to. It's vital. There's also my Facebook page, the official Facebook page of The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. I think I can say that at this point. You know, the one thing about wearing headphones, okay? They always say to me, before I do this TV thing on a Sunday night, they do makeup for TV, otherwise your face becomes a little shiny and reflective. And they always say, do you want any product on your hair? And tonight, I have to say, I said, no thank you, let's see how it is without. I think tonight I've lived to regret that. But anyway, so I'll be getting sprayed next week, probably in some garage somewhere. All right, let's talk now as we come into the final, 14 minutes or so of tonight's broadcast. I have to say, Michael Cole, it was so nice to meet him finally in the flesh. There were so many questions there just wasn't time to ask. And his stories are so good that you have to let him talk. So I binned most of the questions. But, the takeaway point is that he's 79. I hope that I'm half as lucid when I'm 79, because I won't be doing too bad. Wow, is all I can say. Former BBC royal correspondent, as you'll know, Michael Cole. Prince Charles, the question I didn't get to with Michael, I can ask the man who's on next. Professor Wyn Grant, Professor of Politics at Warwick University. Wyn, thank you for waiting. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Prince Charles, you've given some, or rather King Charles, you've given, I think we're all going to take some time to get out of calling him Prince Charles. King Charles III, everybody's been speculating, and I know you have, from your position, as to what kind of king he will be and whether there will be any way in which he will be able to express an opinion, maybe not quite of the kind that he has in the past, but any kind of opinion on anything. What do you think to that?
Well, I think he realises that the role of king is very different from being Prince of Wales, and he can't be outspoken on controversial topical issues in the way that he was in the past. But of course, constitutionally, he is still allowed to talk in private to the Prime Minister and other ministers. And as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, they will have their weekly audiences, and he's allowed to counsel her, to encourage her and warn her. So there will be an opportunity for him to put his views across in private.
Right. And that you think that will happen? That will continue to happen as it has happened in the past?
I'm sure, yes, that he will take these opportunities he has to talk informally to the Prime Minister and other ministers to express his concerns about contemporary issues. What he can't do is go public and make statements which contradict or undermine government policy in any way.
Which is going to be difficult for him, isn't it? Because he's got very clear views on many things, particularly the environment, which we've got serious problems with, you know, the climate change issue. And of course, if we want to go back a couple of decades, very clear views about architecture and what is not a carbuncle on the face of the urban landscape. So, you know, he's a guy who's got very clear and definite views, and holding those back and tempering them and expressing them in the way that you just talked about, isn't that going to be hard for him?
Well, I think it will be quite challenging. He's certainly a person who has strong views. I think what he does hope will happen is that the Prince of Wales will take on some of these issues, that in particularly on environmental issues, climate change, biodiversity and so on, that the Prince of Wales, the new Prince of Wales, will be able to make the kind of remarks that he made in the past, perhaps in a rather different way, perhaps not quite as forcefully as the King would have done, but still put those things into the public domain.
We have a constitutional monarchy, and you know, I studied politics and was taught by, you know, many great people at the University of Liverpool, some of whom are not with us anymore, and we were always taught at the very beginning the unique nature of this constitutional monarchy. So they, you know, they are heads of state, but they don't call the shots anymore, but they have a very clear role in things. Do you think that the role of the royal family in general will be reviewed in terms of its impact on the state, on society in general? Do you think they're going to be consciously looking at changing things, maybe modernising things, maybe slimming things down?
Oh, I think that's certainly the case. King Charles has always said that he wants to slim things down. But of course, there is tremendous demand for members of the royal family to open buildings and so on. I mean, most people prefer to have a minor member of the royal family rather than the politician. But some of these minor members of the royal family who still carry out extensive duties are now getting quite old themselves, and they, you know, pull back in any case, may be quite happy to do that. But it's certainly King Charles's intention to continue a process of modernisation, and in particular to reduce the number of people who appear on the balcony, so to speak.
Do you think he'll be a good king?
I think he will. He's had a long apprenticeship. I think he's very aware of the obligations he has as monarch and the way in which he needs to conduct himself. If, as your previous speaker said, the House of Windsor is to continue providing a series of monarchs to this country, he realises the importance of getting this right.
Which he absolutely has to do. There have been obviously a succession of monarchs over the generations, and they've all had a different view and a different style. How do you think we could characterise, knowing what we know of Charles, how do you think we could characterise at this stage what that style might be? How might it be different from what we've had before?
Well, I think we've already seen that a bit in the walkabouts he's been doing in the previous week. I think he's going to be more in touch with people. I think he's a person who's more prepared to put his emotions out there. He's not quite as reserved as the Queen was. The Queen, I think, was quite properly reserved, but I think he realises that in today's era, you have to reach out to people more, you have to be in touch with them in a rather different kind of way, and to express your own feelings rather more, without, of course, doing anything that you shouldn't do in terms of constitutional proprieties.
We've seen some protest, we've seen some dissent, not much, but we have seen it over this week. People who've made their views known at royal events and walkabouts. Do you know, the police have had a dilemma. We talked about it earlier in this programme. You know, they've interpreted the rules differently, and some people have been, you know, taken off the street, taken away from possible, unrest among crowds of supporters. Do you think we need to be concerned for the freedom You know, it is very much within your bailiwick, I would think, but you tell me. Do we need to be concerned about our freedom of protest in this country? Are we diluting our rights?
Well, I think we want to protect the right to freedom to protest because it's been a rather different situation in the past week or so when we've been through this period of national mourning. I think once that's over, then some of the restraints will be removed. I think, obviously, from the police's point of view, the concern is if someone makes an unpopular protest, this may have repercussions that may lead to trouble in the crowd, and perhaps for the safety of the person, it's best to remove them. But then I don't think we want to prosecute those people because that would encroach on their freedom to protest, which is certainly something we want to protect. So I think after tomorrow, we will see obviously some sort of discussion of the merits or otherwise of having a republic, and obviously people who hold that view are fully entitled to put it forward.
And they need to be able to express themselves. And when policing, that policing has to be done in a uniform way, quite literally, and it has to be done sensibly, as we discussed earlier. Thank you so much, Wynne. Professor Wynne Grant, Professor of Politics at Warwick University, on King Charles III and the era that will become very much his, effective 24 hours from now. We are moving, whatever you might say, whatever your views might be, into a different era. The tenor, the style, the tone of this nation is likely to change. If you think about the number of things that featured the Queen's image, from banknotes to buildings to everything, a lot of things are going to change, whatever your views on the monarchy and its role might be. Last up tonight, Sean Mandel. I've done programmes with him before many times. Sean is the host of the Spilling Royal Tea podcast in the United States. Royal reporter, a man who's very interested in these things. Sean, we don't have a ton of time, but thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I followed the reaction to this event quite closely, the reaction in America, and then because we were all overtaken by events over here, I wasn't able to see it through over this last week. How is the story, if we can call it that, playing in the US now, Sean?
It started off as being top-line news that was covered for the first few days after the Queen's passing. But then there was quickly a sort of fading off in terms of coverage in a lot of news outlets, depending on what those outlets were. A lot of celebrity and pop culture outlets were still covering it, of course, because that's part of their bread and butter. And there is that, relentless fascination among a certain portion of the American population with the royals. But of course, now that the Queen's funeral is only hours away, there's been an increasing interest in what's going to happen at that event, and also a lot of conversation going on about the monarchy, about certainly Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, and trying to understand for many people the Queen and her life and legacy, as many people were not as familiar, obviously, as Britons were with all that she has done and achieved during all she did and achieved during her life.
Meghan Markle, you mentioned the name, and of course we have to bring Meghan into this conversation for obvious reasons. She is under a lot of hard media scrutiny this side of the Atlantic. How are people seeing Meghan in America now? Because at the beginning of the Meghan era, when Harry and Meghan got together and then got married, there was enormous pride in America. There was an American part of the British royal family. It was an amazing thing for the United States, and people were very proud, I think, in general. What do people in America feel about Meghan these days?
It's a little more complicated since then. I would still say that she is incredibly popular in the United States, and there is a large contingent of people who do feel that she was treated badly by the royal family, that there were elements of race, and whether that's, you want to call it outright racism or microaggressions, both in the British media, how she's treated in the media, and certainly by members of the royal household, the staff there, the so-called men in gray suits. So there is concern or rather, sympathy for Meghan on that part. But beyond that, it does get a little bit more complicated as, she continues to do certain interviews, which don't always paint her in the best light and sometimes do her a disservice.
One of the big talking topics over here in the papers today is Harry and Meghan's children, Archie and Lilibet, whether they will automatically get royal titles and whether they should. Is that something that has appeared on the horizon in America? Are people talking about that there?
It is something that people are talking about, but I would say that it's more being discussed in circles that maybe I find myself in, where people who do watch and follow the royals. It's not something that's maybe being done in broader coverage, but there certainly have been articles about it, and there certainly have been segments on television about it, because there is incredible interest always in royal children, and especially in Archie and Lilibet. And, you know, the question of whether Archie was going to get a royal title was allegedly a huge part of why Meghan and Harry decided to step down as senior working royals, because there was the issue of security, of him not getting a title before. So it will be interesting to see whether, you know, Charles does offer the title for the HRH Prince and Princess to Lilibet and Archie, or whether he doesn't, and then whether or not Meghan and Harry will want to use that. So it's very fraught.
When's the next edition of your podcast?
Will be coming out after the Queen's funeral. There's a lot to discuss, a lot of people I want to be talking to. So it's going to be definitely maybe a two-parter, a long episode for sure.
I can think of at least 20 topics right off the top of my head, and I'm sure you'll get many more. Sean Mandel, thank you very much. Nice to talk with you again. Sean Mandel, host of the Spilling Royalty podcast, an edition of which is due out very soon. Now, look, I know this has been a very different couple of shows that I've done here at Talk TV, and it's been quite an experience for me to come back to doing news as a thing. I've enjoyed it. It's been